You married him on a Tuesday. She was standing in the doorway of a plant nursery outside Warrensburg, Missouri, in a canvas apron with dirt to the elbows, and she had not seen me in 11 years. I said, "You married him on a Tuesday. You were supposed to be marrying me on the Saturday." And she said, "Sam." That's all. Just my name, in the voice you'd use on somebody standing too close to an edge. I said, 4 days. Alma, 4 days. And she said, I know how many days it was. I want to tell you what I had in my hand while I was saying that. A manila folder, about 1.5 inches thick, that my daughter had put on my kitchen table 9 days earlier. So I said the second thing, the one I'd driven 90 miles to say. I said, I know why you did it. And Alma Reyes put one hand flat on the doorframe of her own business, and did not say anything at all for about 15 seconds. Then she said, Iris found the file. My name's Sam Delaney. I'm 48. I'm a land surveyor out of Sedalia, Missouri. Property lines, boundary disputes, easements. 11 years ago, I was 37 and I was 4 days out from getting married for the second time. Everything was done. I want you to understand how done it was. 61 people. A pavilion at a state park on the Lake of the Ozarks. My mother had bought a dress in March and had it altered twice. Alma's sister had flown in from Phoenix on the Thursday. On the Tuesday the 8th, at 3 in the afternoon, Alma Reyes went into the Pettis County courthouse and married a man named Hollis Vaughn. Hollis Vaughn was 64 years old. She called me at 4. She said 11 words and I've never forgotten one of them. She said, Sam, I got married this afternoon. Please don't come here. And she hung up, and she moved out of a rented house in Sedalia inside a week, and I did not speak to that woman again for 11 years. Here is what I believed for 11 years, and I want to say it plainly, because I said it plainly enough to enough people at the time. I believed she had somebody else, a man 3 doors down the age scale from me, 64, widowed, some money, and that she'd looked at a surveyor with a truck and a mortgage, and a 13-year-old daughter, and a custody fight, and she'd done the arithmetic. That's what I told her sister. That's what I told my mother, who cried about the dress and then never mentioned her again. And it's what I told Iris. My daughter was 13 years old. She had known Alma for 2 years and she had picked out a dress herself, a green one, and I sat that child down on the couch in a rented house and told her that Alma had married an older man with money and that she had probably always been going to. That's the part. Everything else in this story I can live with. That's the part. Iris is 24 now. She works for a title company in Columbia, which is the kind of coincidence that makes you think somebody's arranging things. And in June she came home for a weekend to help me clear out the storage unit I've been paying $41 a month on since 2015, for no reason anybody can name. If you're still with me, and I know this is where people decide whether they want the rest of it, do me one favor and hit subscribe. Because what my daughter pulled out of a file box in a storage unit in June rearranged 11 years of my life in about 40 minutes, and I'd rather tell that to people who stayed. Now, the box. My custody case with Iris's mother ran from 2014 to 2015. Carla filed to modify. It was ugly in the ordinary way, and it ended with me having Iris 4 nights a week, which is what I'd asked for. And I kept everything. Surveyors keep everything. There were 4 banker's boxes in that unit, and one of them was that case. Iris opened it because she works with documents for a living, and she cannot help herself. And she read the guardian ad litem report. The guardian ad litem in a custody case interviews everybody and writes a recommendation, and the judge reads it like scripture. Ours was a woman named Patrice Okonjo, and the report was dated the 22nd of September 2014. And in the section on my household, there were 2 paragraphs about my fiancée, Alma Reyes, 27. And a felony forgery conviction out of Jasper County, Missouri, in 2011. 5 years probation, discharge 2017. I knew about the conviction. She'd told me in the 2nd month we were together, sitting in my truck outside a Sonic in Clinton, and she'd told me the whole thing. 23 years old, a boyfriend called Terry, an account she wrote checks on that wasn't hers, a plea her public defender told her to take because trial was a coin flip. I want to tell you about that night, because it's the only way the rest of this makes any sense. We'd been seeing each other 7 weeks. She managed the garden center out on 65, and I'd come in for landscape fabric in the March, and stayed 40 minutes, and then I'd come back for more landscape fabric than any human being needs. And on that night in the truck, she told me about Jasper County, and she got to the end of it and she said, so that's it. That's the thing. I'd rather you had it now than in a year. And she had her hand on the door handle the entire time she was talking. I noticed that. She had it on the handle from the first sentence. I said, Alma, I take property lines for a living. I've read about 4,000 public records. Do you know how many people in this county have a felony on them? And she said, it's not the same when it's yours. I said, no, I imagine it isn't. Then I said, take your hand off the door. She did. And we sat in that parking lot until about 1 in the morning, and I met Iris 3 weeks later, and I asked Alma to marry me, in the October, in the middle of a Menards parking lot because I could not make myself wait for a better location. That's who we were. 18 months, from landscape fabric to 61 people at a pavilion. I knew about the conviction. It was nothing to me. I want that on record. What I did not know until my daughter read it out loud to me in my own kitchen at 48 years of age is that Carla's attorney had found it. And that the report said this, that the entry into the household of an adult with a recent felony conviction for a crime of dishonesty, occurring during the pendency of the modification, weighed against the father's petition. Weighed against. The final hearing was the 9th of October. Alma married Hollis Vaughn on the 8th of September. I drove 90 miles and asked her about it standing in the doorway of her nursery, and she made me a cup of coffee and we sat on 2 upturned crates in a greenhouse for about 3 hours. Here's what she told me. She found out on the 2nd of September. Patrice Okonjo interviewed her on the 28th of August, and it went fine. And then a week later, Alma ran into a paralegal she knew slightly from the garden center. Sedalia is not a big town. And that woman said something she should not have said. And Alma understood in about 4 seconds that she was the reason I was going to lose 4 nights a week with my daughter. She had 6 days. And she said, I thought about it for 2 of them, Sam. And I want you to know that the first plan was to just call the wedding off. I said, that's what I'd have wanted. And she said, no, it isn't. That's what you'd have said. Then she laid it out for me the way she'd laid it out for herself in a rented house on Elm in 2014, and I have not been able to find the hole in it in 9 months of looking. If she calls it off, the wedding comes off the file. And then Patrice Okonjo, who is not stupid, asks why. And the honest answer is, because of her record. Which is worse. Because now it isn't a fiancé with an old conviction, it's a father who removed a household member to game an assessment. She said, and you'd have fought me. You'd have driven to that woman's office and told her you were marrying me anyway and she could put whatever she wanted in the report. You know you would. I would have. That is precisely and exactly what I would have done. So she needed a version where there was nothing for me to fight. Not a postponement, not a difficult conversation. A dated, filed, public, unarguable fact that put her outside my household and made me, this is her phrase, a man who got left, which nobody holds against a father. And she said, it had to be before the Saturday. If it happened after, it looks arranged. 6 days. She had 6 days and she used 4 of them. Hollis Vaughn had been her mother's neighbor for 20 years. 64, widowed since 2009, retired from the post office. She went to his house on the 4th of September and sat at his kitchen table and told him the entire thing, and he said yes in under a minute. They were married at 3 in the afternoon, on the 8th in the Pettis County courthouse, with 2 clerks as witnesses. She drove to his house afterward, and he made her a sandwich, and she went home to Elm Street on her own. They never lived together. Not one night. He kept his house, she kept hers, and 11 months later she moved to Warrensburg, and in 2017 they filed a dissolution that took 4 months and cost $600. Hollis Vaughn is 75 now and lives in Sedalia, and I have been to see him twice. The first time I sat in his front room, and he made coffee and did not say much, and near the end I asked him why he'd done it. And he said, because she asked me at a kitchen table, and she was very calm about it, and I've been on this earth long enough to know that when somebody's that calm about a thing that size, they've already decided, and the only question left is whether they have to do it by themselves. I asked her the obvious question. I asked it about 6 times in 3 hours in different words. Why didn't you tell me? After the hearing, after a year, after 5. And her answer was the same every time, and it did not get easier. She said, because you'd have given it back. She said, you had Iris 4 nights a week by the 20th of October, and if I'd called you in November and told you what it cost, you would have walked into that courthouse and told the truth about it. Because that is who you are, Sam, and I did not do all of that so you could undo it. And then she said the one I wasn't ready for. She said, and because you never asked. 11 years. I never once called that woman and asked her why. Not once. I decided in about 4 minutes on the phone on the 8th of September that I knew, and I told everybody I knew, including a 13-year-old, and then I built a whole life on top of it. She said, "If you'd called me in the January, Sam, I'd have told you. I'd have folded in about 9 seconds. Nobody called." That was 9 months ago. Iris drove to Warrensburg on her own in July. She did not tell me she was going. She sat in that greenhouse for 2 hours with a woman she'd been told at 13 had traded her father in, and she came home and did not talk about it for 2 days, and then she talked about it for about 4 hours. She's angrier with me than she is with her mother's lawyer, which I think is correct. Alma and I don't have a word for it yet, and neither does she, and we've both stopped trying to find one. She's 38, and I'm 48, and there's 11 years sitting in the middle of it that nobody gets back. What we have is Sundays. I drive over, we work in that nursery, and we talk about absolutely nothing for 6 hours. 9 months of Sundays. Last month she asked me to look at a boundary line on the west side of her property, which is my actual job, and I have never in my life been so pleased to be asked to do a survey. My mother is 81 and has the dress. She wants me to know she has the dress. She mentions it. One last thing. Alma Reyes had 6 days, and she used 4 of them to make a decision that was, by any measure, mine. She took a thing off my table without asking me. She married a man she wasn't married to in any real sense, so that I would not be able to argue with her about it. And she was right that I'd have argued, and she was right that I'd have lost my daughter. Some people I've told this to say, that's the single most loving thing they've ever heard of, and that a person who does that for you at 27 has earned whatever they want. Other people tell me she decided she knew better than me about my own child and my own marriage, and that she let a 13-year-old grow up believing something false in order to keep control of it, and that 11 years is what that cost. So settle it for me in the comments, because she and I sit on opposite sides of this, and neither of us has moved. Was that love, or did she take a decision out of my hands that was mine to make? And if you sat through all of that with me, subscribe. There's a new one every week, and every single one of them is about somebody who never asked the one question that would have explained everything. Thanks for sitting with me.